Our next speaker is Barry Goodwin, and those of you who know Barry, he's has joint appointments actually in the Ag Econ and Natural Resource Department at NC State and the Economics Department. Barry is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor there and a Graduate Alumni Distinguished Professor. And anyone who knows Barry knows he's very well known. He's put out a lot of students, many of whom I've got a chance to work with here in DC. He's written extensively on commodity programs, and some real classics, I think, over the years on effects of things like the decoupled payments on production, things that I think have been very helpful in WTO negotiations, other sorts of things. And with Vince, he and him, by himself and also co-authoring with Vince, have written a number of the key papers that you see on crop insurance. And I think if you could look at any Google Scholar account, their papers are right up there with the other papers on federal crop insurance. Barry's going to talk about the price and income support programs, so-called Title I. And Barry, I leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That's a very kind introduction. This is actually my first time to visit IFPRI, so it's exciting for a few reasons for me to be here. And I've seen a couple of former students already this morning, so it's nice to have the invitation, and I appreciate you all coming. I'm going to talk about Title I, as Joe said, which is the old historical commodity title, where the commodity programs have always been. Before we go to that, though, I want to put it just in a little bit of context. You will hear, and it's factually correct, that farm income is down. It's been dropping for the last couple of years, and it's down substantially, but it's down from some very high levels. And I think the middle diagram here shows that the best. That's real net farm income and cash income. And you'll see that we're really returning back to what's been sort of a long-run normal average state of affairs. Another thing that very often is neglected in policy discussions is the fact that farm households, as a rule, and almost without exception, heavily depend upon off-farm income sources, whether it's labor, investments, rental of their assets, a lot of different ways, but it is a very important source of income. And Vince alluded to this earlier, but those factors together and some other statistics that I don't have time to talk about, but it does establish the fact that as a whole, as a slice of society, U.S. farms are a very wealthy bunch. They have high incomes. The solid line there is U.S. households as a whole income, and you see farm incomes have been substantially above that for many years now. So looking at, I'm not going to say as much about the 2014 Farm Bill because we have some new things to talk about as of yesterday. So it was, we were all scrambling around trying to read the text of the conference report and updating things. But we're talking about here $38 billion. It turned out to cost with the FCIC, the crop insurance outlays, and you saw the split earlier. It's it's divided up with ARC, PLC, and then crop insurance, main mechanisms for subsidizing growers. I'm going to focus on Title I again, PLC and ARC, and I'll define that for anyone who doesn't know what it is here in just a minute. But it turned out to really be a budget blowout because of the fact that prices were high and then have come down even more. So cost quite a bit more than it should have. So the conference report was released. I think it actually technically came out the evening of the 10th, but I think the 11th is when it was published. The preliminary CBO scoring predicts an increase in Title I cost over. Now, I think the bill as a whole is basically, I think Joe said 870, and I think it's predicted to be right on target with that. but there is some rearranging that takes place. And Title I programs are going to cost a bit more this time. There's some important provisions in there that I think are really interesting to talk about. If you follow this debate, the Senate wanted to actually had some provisions. Grassley was the main proponent of this, but had provisions to scale back on the adjusted gross income limit that you could have, and tighten down on who gets the payments. And the House proposals were really much more generous and flexible, and that's what carried the day. Nieces, nephews, and cousins now are eligible for the full payment amount. It's $125,000 per person, or $250,000 if you're married. And if you're lucky enough to be growing peanuts, you get a separate $250,000 cap there. They're not counted together. And peanuts, I'll show you a picture here in a minute, but peanuts are the place to be in these programs these days. The limit stays at $900,000 in terms of when you start losing your Title I benefits. Again, you double it if you're married. That's adjusted gross income limit. So, you know, you're in bad shape if you're making over $900,000 on average a year, because your payments are going to start getting trimmed back. This Grassley-Meadows amendment really made a lot of sense, and it went nowhere, essentially. The SNAP work requirements were the other hang-up in getting the bill through. And at the end of the day, you know, regardless of whether you think that was a good idea or bad, it didn't go anywhere. So Paul Ryan, when he gave his statement on this yesterday, pointed out some advantages in terms of cost savings, but they're very modest administrative changes, nothing major there. I think one of the biggest issues that those who watch policy need to be aware of is the fact that farmers are going to be able to shift between the two major Title I programs, the price loss coverage and the agricultural risk coverage program, each year. So this could, in my calculations, it could be quite a expensive feature of the plan, because the farmers are naturally, they always have and they will go with what the best deal is, where the money's the best. And I think everything we've seen and CBO predictions, PLC is going to be the likely choice, but then if the revenue guarantees start rising, ARC is going to look good. There's some substantial increases in loan rates, which that hasn't happened in quite a while. I won't go through the individual ones here. We were hearing 15%, but in fact, before this came out of conference, but in fact, it's quite a bit more than that for some. The limit for marketing loans was doubled to $600,000. They're going to start using RMA yield data, which is important in the ARC program, because RMA does yield plugging and they do a trend adjustment. And RMA is the crop insurance agency. There's going to be an option to update your PLC yield. And again, if you have something that's less than 75% of the county average, they're going to replace it with 75%. So they're sweetening the deal by not lowering your guarantees. There are price escalators that are built into this, which really is a perverse type of policy when you think about it. We're going to guarantee you more and more as prices go up, as your incomes go up. And again, the PLC allows this base yield updating. Dairy is a big one. Really, Dan should have been here to talk about dairy, but it's a big Title I program, and I think some of the biggest changes took place here. MPP, Margin Protection Plan, has been renamed. It's the same thing, dairy margin coverage. There's new coverage levels for the smaller growers, greatly reduced premiums on catastrophic coverage for larger growers, an 88% cut. It eliminates the restriction that you can't get both livestock insurance in the form of livestock gross margin, LGM, and a new plan, dairy revenue protection, and also still get payments from this new DMC. That was the double dipping was not allowed before. It will be now. And if producers previously were enrolled in this, the big complaint was this insurance doesn't work because we're not getting any payments from it. So they're going to get it, their premium if they paid it 75% credit or 50% refund on that. So I think the overall gestalt of the spirit of the legislation comes up if you read a few of the quotes that are out there, and I won't read all of this, but some of them are pretty revealing, I think. Colin Peterson, who's very active in this, who's the ranking member in the House side, said that there's a concern that when people find out what's in the bill, it will start unraveling. He also said if you have less than 5 million pounds of milk, and that's about 240 cows, under what we've put in the bill, you will not be able to lose money unless you really try. There's going to be a lot of options available to dairy farmers. Some people say this is just too good. Small-scale farmers are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. Paul Ryan, who's sold himself largely as a fiscal conservative, says, you know, rural America is at the heart of our way of life. Our farmers, ranchers, and rural communities count on agricultural policy. Debbie Stabenow, the final bill reflects a hard-fought, bipartisan, bicameral agreement. It's a good bill for our farmers and everyone who eats. There's a few things that are not important at all, but I find very interesting. I wish that this pet rock quote was mine, as Scott Faber from EWG has been calling this provision. What natural stone products have to do with commodity markets is a mystery to me, but there is a provision in the Act, I looked it up yesterday, that they're mandating a report be furnished to USDA within 180 days to establish a producer checkoff fund, which is what beef and the marketing orders commodities typically have, and Scott's calling it the pet rock checkoff. So it's kind of an odd thing. There's not much money there. There's a second round of the market facilitation payments, which is the ad hoc payments to compensate for the tariff battles that are going on right now. And essentially, we've talked about this in a lot of different contexts, but it allows double dipping to become triple dipping or quadruple dipping. You're going to get an insurance payment on the basis of prices. You can get your PLC or ARC payment, and then 2 rounds of the MFP payments. So there's a lot of redundancy in there. I'm just about out of time. Vince mentioned the fact that premium subsidies, the FCIC budget, the money that's used to support crop insurance has taken on a more and more and more important role, and you certainly see that. I said peanuts are the place to be. You can see right here, this is government support as a share of the value of production. Peanuts almost 50%. So in summary, I will skip over most of these things. I think we did see each farm bill there being a tightening of the AGI, and that was argued for this time, and in fact, Congress stepped away from that. So there's no changes there. I think it's a step backwards. Now payment limits apply to the extended family tree. Another of Scott's things I found quite entertaining was that Ancestry.com or 23andMe is going to get some traction with people trying to find out where their family's tree is so they can get in on this deal. This annual selection of ARC, PLC, I think it could be a significant cost item. I do think there's a lot of concern about decoupled support becoming recoupled because of this annual choice election and the fact that we're updating payments. And I think dairy producers made up especially well here. So